Hello and welcome. You're listening to another new episode of NMPC Plus. My name, for those that are uninitiated, is Josh. I am the worship pastor at New Mercy Palisades Church, little old church plant that could, in Palisades Park, New Jersey. I am joined by Pastor Key. Hello, Pastor Key.
Hello.
And I am joined by a very, 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 very special guest by the name of Rala. Hello, Rala.
Hello.
I'm going to ask you to speak just a little bit closer to the mic. We're going to get this. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good.
For those that are wondering what is going on here, Pastor Bobe is actually away at a conference today and she couldn't join for this week's podcast. So yesterday we decided, you know what, rather than just go me and Pastor Keith, because we've never done that before, and it'd probably get a little awkward if we just stared into each other's eyes.
Probably.
We thought maybe we could just invite somebody, and last minute we were able to get your approval, and you decided to join us. So first of all, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Are you nervous at all?
A little bit.
A little bit? Well,
yeah.
Try not to be, because, you know, we're going to be very gentle with you, I promise. But beyond that, you know, like after a certain point, you kind of forget that you're doing this podcast and we just get to kind of mess around and all that stuff. So, yeah, hopefully that happens sooner rather than later. I think first, before I do anything else, I should probably just ask as many questions as I can about Rala. It's almost like a spotlight, like a member spotlight that we're doing here on this podcast for a little bit. Let me say this first of all. I believe congratulations are in order for you specifically, Rala, because I'm told that you have just finished a very intense series of tests. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm at the end of physician assistant school right now, and at the very end, just have to take a lot of organ systems exams, and we just take that exam so that it'll help us prepare for the boards that we take at the end of May or June. I took them the past 2 days, and thank God I passed all of them, so I don't have to retake them, which is very nice. But yeah, so thanks for the congrats.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is this 3 years running, 4 years running that you've been in school for this, or how long was that process?
This is my third year, because my program is a 3-year program.
Okay, wow. So now, please excuse me again for being uninitiated in this. Does this make you doctor at the end of this? Or
no.
What is the
doctor.
official title?
It's physician assistant certified. So.
All right. Well, to me, to me, that's a doctor. So, we're just gonna call you de facto doctor, Rala. All the real doctors are probably super angry at me right now. I apologize. Before I anger anyone else. And so, congratulations to you on that. I can't even imagine how hard it must have been. I know a little bit about that struggle. You've been doing rotations, you've been doing rounds, you've been kind of here, there, and everywhere, just to sort of understand, like, if you were to have a specialty, what specialty you might kind of get into. I wondered if you, like, looking back on the last 3 years or so, right? And that's not to say that you won't have an interesting journey moving forward, right? But if you could, looking back on the last 3 years or so, what was kind of like a couple big highlights, things that stand out about physician's assistant school, whether it's about the rotations, whether about like the different specialties you've kind of been able to be with? Like, what's the most interesting things that sort of stand out to you right now?
Right now, I think I'm just happy that I was able to get this far. And I know it's not anything that I could have done on my own, but definitely with support of like Q1 and my family, kids, just God's grace that I feel. And even yesterday, or the 2 days when I was walking onto campus and just thinking about the past 3 years and that journey of when I first started and how far I've come now, I think that's what I am most thankful for when I reflect back as, wow, I was able to do this. And it was hard. I think just the first year and a half, it's a lot of in the classroom, you're studying. And I'm a little bit older now, so I had to get back into learning how to study. And then going on to the different rotations, it switched every month. But being at the hospital and also learning surgery, for one thing, I really enjoyed being a part of that. The operating room. But every specialty is so different, and I learned something new with every rotation. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have a sense yet about the specialty that you might get into once everything is all said and done?
I'm not sure. I mean, I do like parts of being in an office, but I do also like the hospital environment as well. So, I don't know. And I really like parts of surgery. So if I could find something that can include all of that, that'd be great.
Surgery.
Surgery.
Yeah.
Well, not to just, gloss over, sort of glaze over the fact that, your husband on your right, your right hand side has been sort of journeying with you in all of this, not to mention that you also have a family to raise and 2 kids. Pastor Key, I should probably sort of ask you, now that we're sort of at the tail end of a long 3-year journey. How does it feel to know that your wife kind of made it all the way here, and that you get to sort of not just celebrate with her, but also kind of like hold her up and kind of triumph with her, in all of these things?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's still pretty amazing to me that she was able to do it at all. It's not a slight on her abilities. I mean, she definitely has ability, but just every night I would see her studying. And I'm just like, man. And sometimes I glance over at what she's studying. I'm like, this looks terrible. Like,
yeah.
I would never want to study this. But I mean, she just did it unfazed for 3 years.
Yeah.
And so being able to see, like, I was really praying hard so she had to take 13 summative exams past couple days. And I really wanted her to pass all of them, just for the sake of her not having to take another one. You know what I mean? Just to get that relief. And so she passed, and it's a big relief, I think, for both of us and for the kids to get mom back.
Yeah. Well, Kiwon says that I did it unfazed, but there was a lot of internal struggle.
Sure.
It was pretty stressful.
Yeah.
But I guess I tried to not show it as much, but there were definitely times where I would cry just because it was so hard. But yeah, definitely not unfazed, but thankful that, we got through. We got through.
There was that one time after the first semester, she came to me and she just started bawling. And then she was just like, I just had to let it out because it was so hard.
Yeah.
So I remember that. But, she just plugged away. And
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah, so just getting past this and finally starting to work, I think, is just a big relief.
Which is itself, I'm sure, going to come with a lot of challenges and things to get used to. But
definitely there's going to be a learning curve
of course.
when I start working. But it'll be nice to come home from work and not have to study. Yeah, because I think that's the thing. I go to rotations or I go to class, come home, have to study. So it'll be nice not to have to do that so much. But
just the thought of that, so miserable.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing too is just to kind of, I think the idea of like being present kind of comes to mind. The idea of like holding yourself away and studying while it is important and while it is absolutely necessary to what you got to do. The other thing is, I'm sure there's a lot of it where you just get to be present. Not just with each other, but with your kids.
Yeah.
Not just in your own family, but maybe with your friends and kind of, all of the thing that I'm thinking of is maybe like all of the things that you've had to say no to over the last 3 years, just because you're trying to be faithful to this journey. you get to reclaim that a little bit. Maybe get a life, maybe get some friends and start seeing them a little more often than you've been able to.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that as well. I mean, when you talk about being present, it's different when, I am at home. I do see my kids, but when I'm studying, my mind is somewhere else. Definitely it's hard to be present when your mind is occupied with something else. So
Sure.
I am looking forward to, like you said, just being present for my children, for my family, for this church, with friends. So it'll be nice to kind of get that part of my life back as well. So.
Yeah.
Please.
Well, we celebrate with you, Rala. It could not have been easy. I'm sure
Thank
it
you.
was dang hard. I said dang, not damn.
Yeah, I just said it.
Sure, it was damn hard. But we celebrate with you, and we're so happy for you. I am also happy that you're here. I don't think it can be understated how happy I am to have some new life, new blood. For not only that it introduces kind of like a new dynamic, but also it's the who of it, right? Like, you're not just anybody. You're not just any old member of our church. You are also Pastor Key's wife. You are a mother to 2 children. You have this incredible, wonderful kind of perspective to offer. And I was thinking about it. Today as I was just thinking about how I wanted to take the conversation of today. I thought about, like, should we just absolutely mess the whole kind of format of the podcast up? Should I make it about, like marriage and and all that stuff? And I thought to myself, one thought that I had, not to say that those things aren't important. Let me just say that off the bat. But I thought maybe instead of those more obvious places to kind of take the podcast today, I thought maybe we could just lean on your perspective, not necessarily as a pastor's wife, although that is a really big part of your life, not only as a mother to 2 children, but at least in this podcast, to lean on your experience just as another believer with her own set of experiences and how you see the Bible, how you kind of look at things. Because sometimes between the 3 of us, me, Pastor Key, Pastor Bobe, sometimes we get into these loops where it's like, as pastors, we have ideas, and as people in ministry, we have these ideas. But I think the thing that I'm most looking forward to is your perspective as someone who's not in ministry. I think, like, that's ultimately where I landed, to get your perspective as someone who's not in ministry. Although they might try to say that as a pastor's wife you're in ministry and all that stuff, there's a shade of that where there's something there, but there's also, like, you went to PA school for the last 3 years, right? Like, you had to raise 2 children over the course of what is it, 14 years, 15 years, something like that.
15.
So that's where I'm gonna ultimately have the questions land and kind of go to when I like take the rest of this podcast. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there, and also put that out to anyone who's listening or watching, that there's a wealth of knowledge and experience that I'm gonna lean on. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that sounds good. I actually like that, because I am my own person.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah. Well, it was just very interesting, because I think many years ago, I think I saw that because I wasn't actually in professional ministry. I didn't go to seminary, whereas a lot of people around me, they did go to seminary. I think I kind of saw that as, in some ways, a weakness or a deficit on my part, because I couldn't contribute in that way. But throughout, the years of just leaning into that, finding out who I am, what my identity is, what my role is in this life, it doesn't have to be from that place always, but I have my own individual role, my own individual identity, and I still can, contribute. I still can share my story, albeit it might be different, from other people's story.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember because we used to be part of a different pastoral staff, and pretty much everybody there was, even the wives had gone to seminary, and that, you don't have to be in seminary to be effective, in the church and things like that, and be your own person, have your own call as a believer. So definitely. It's a
Okay.
good direction to go.
I'm thankful for the affirmation. So then let's do this. Let's try to do a version of our normal podcast, with the caveat that we have someone who's not in ministry, but that is not a detriment. But that's actually an advantage to us for our conversations today. Pastor Key, you gave the message today. By the way, also I'm going to sprinkle in some questions about because your name does come up sometimes. You do come up on our podcast sometimes, especially when it comes to, Pastor Key's sermon delivery or whether or not he did good. I'm going to ask those questions too.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I just want the audience to know that I'm also going there too every once in a while. But the heart of it is Rala is her own person.
Amen.
Pastor Key, you gave the message this past Sunday. It was a message about Ruth and Naomi, and it was a very interesting line that you took, kind of where you ended up with this message. I mean, I'm with you. A lot of maybe 98% of the messages that I've ever heard about Ruth and Naomi has always been about, look at the amazing thing through Ruth's life lens, everything. And Naomi, in a lot of ways, I don't want to say second fiddle, but there is a kind of on the way to get to Ruth, we learn about Naomi's story, right? But you did something different to all of those messages, and you decided to say, nope, to me, Naomi is the thing. Naomi is the one that we're going to land on, that we're going to talk about and kind of go in and in and in. I thought that was very interesting. So I wondered, as we always do, I'm going to lean on you to give us that refresher, a reminder about what your message is about. Of course, nothing can replace going back and listening to it yourself. So if you're listening, if you're watching, you can just go back one video or one entry and you'll hear it for yourself. But Pastor Key, for the sake of this conversation now, would you give us that refresher and reminder?
Yeah. So, I focus on Ruth because, Naomi, because to a certain degree, Ruth is kind of hard to relate to if you think about it. She's the hero. She does the right thing, right? She blah, blah, blah. But then if you look at Naomi, I think a lot of people can relate to her. Maybe not as tragic as her, but in terms of her getting to a place where she's like, I don't know where my faith is, and so I explored her character and I realized, my goodness, she wasn't always in this place. She's actually a very complex human being. She had a time period where she was so influential, she actually caused Ruth to become a believer in God. You know what I mean? That kind of influence is not an easy thing, And so I did a deep dive into her character and I realized, well, Naomi herself is an amazing person. Naomi herself is a person of faith who's been through the ups and through the downs. And so I felt that story, that arc was worth exploring because we all go through the ups and downs. Right. And that was basically it. And just the encouragement of the message was, even if your faith is weak, even if you're in a place that's hard and your faith feels frail, it's still real faith, And the title of the sermon was A Mutual Faith. And basically this idea that sometimes we need Ruth when we're Naomi, but then also Ruth needed Naomi earlier in life when she didn't believe in God, and so there's this mutuality dynamic that's critical for anybody to grow. And so, we're not an island, any of us, that's basically the gist of the message. So.
Yeah. How did he do?
Oh man!
I heard that you gave him a star for after that one.
Yeah. So, sometimes after Sunday, he will ask me. He'll initiate the question, "What did you think of my sermon?" And then if I don't answer right away, it's like it's like because I'm trying to encourage but also give constructive criticism.
Yes.
So, but this past Sunday, I told him, without him asking me, I was like, "Hey, I liked your sermon," And if I say that to him, then I think he should take it as, "Hey, it was good. It was good stuff. Like it moved me, and I feel like it really spoke to my heart. That So it was good."
So when she first told me, I didn't hear her. And she was like, "Did you hear what I said about your sermon?" I was like, "What, you said something about my sermon?" And I probably because I didn't expect anything.
Sure.
Which is why I didn't hear her.
No, but he was on his phone, and he was just doing something. And so I thought, I'll just tell him now because he's going to ask me about it later. But I guess he didn't hear me because he didn't respond. And then I think later he asked me, "So what'd you think?" I was like, "I already told you what I thought."
And then she didn't tell me. So she's like, she refuses to tell me.
Because I was so annoyed. So I was like, "I'm not going to tell you right now."
So she didn't tell me.
I didn't tell you until after, like right before we were about to go to sleep. I was like, "Hey," and then I told him it was a good sermon.
She said, "I give you a star."
Yeah, he was very quick to tell us about that star on our Tuesday staff meeting, by the way.
I think I've gotten 2 stars in all the years I've preached sermons. Anyway.
Until you realize it's 1 out of 5. No, I'm just kidding. Naomi, by the way, I heard, as another kind of encouragement to you, Pastor Key, I had heard, I think you had also heard this too, but like after the message during like fellowship and a couple times, different pockets of people hanging out afterwards, I heard that like people were going up to other people and be like, I'll be your Ruth, or like I'll be your Naomi, or something like that, kind of all that stuff. So hey, I think I in a lot of ways as a fellow preacher, I think that is also another mark of kind of a successful sermon. Not necessarily that people are so kind of entranced by your eloquence, but the fact that it shakes them up to like do something about it, right?
Yeah, no, that's
like,
better.
Yeah. So there were a bunch of people that kind of, I think Pastor Bobe herself, she was like, one of the people came up to me, she was like, "I'll be your Naomi." I was like, okay, what a weighty thing to just drop on somebody's lap like that, So yes, I wondered, and maybe this is just my bias as a pastor, preacher, someone in ministry, but, Rala, I'd love to get your take on this too. Pastor Key, when you gave your message, I was a little bit distracted on Sunday, as you know. So I had to go back and listen to it, particularly like the first half of the message. And I was struck when I listened to it later. You've done this before. I mean, I've done this before when I've given messages too, but I was struck by this time for whatever reason. You in the delivery of the sermon, you almost right away went into past messages that you've heard about this story of this relationship between Ruth and Naomi. You've often heard it said that Naomi is not necessarily the best. Naomi isn't portrayed in the best of lights. She's opportunistic. She's a little bit downcast, downtrodden, all that stuff. Yeah. Okay. I was struck by how quickly you went to the voice of the other, as opposed to giving your version of the message, right? Is that something? Maybe this is how we can take it. Because Pastor Key, to you, I'm asking: is that something that was necessary in your delivery of it, in the kind of framing all of these different ideas that you had for us on Sunday? Yeah. And Rala, what I'm interested to know is for you as a listener, is that important for you to know that like in the hearing of the message delivered, you're hearing that Naomi is the subject and Naomi is not just an opportunistic whatever. Is it important for you to hear that there are others that might portray her like that? Like, is it important to you in your framing your understanding of the message at all? I think that's how I want to kind of take it. So, Pastor Key, for you, like I asked before, is it important for you to immediately go there in your delivery of the message, and why? It's not right or wrong. I was just struck by that specifically.
Yeah, for me, I think part of it is because I have heard messages like that. I was just speaking from experience, right? Sure. But on the other hand, also, it's just an interesting angle to approach those ideas, because I can kind of go the straight path, like, Naomi, think about her life. She was actually more like this than, what you might assume. There's that way, but then I felt it was just a more interesting angle to kind of go this way, like, you know what, people, and I know people who see her this way, and then people are like, oh, why is that? And then that gives them an opportunity to dig more deeply into it and kind of look at it. I don't know, it's just an interesting angle of an attack. Sure. And Peyton actually mentioned that as well. She's like, oh, I appreciated how you unpacked it that way. Nice. And so I realized, whoa, what's that face?
Nothing. And in your heart, you were probably like, yes, my daughter approves of me.
but yeah, it wasn't a deliberate like anything. It was just more like, oh, this is an interesting angle. Yeah, it's a good way to package it so that it has a little bit more bite than a typical vanilla like approach. Sure. So.
Yeah. And I think it might not always be a necessary angle to approach it from, but I think it just shows the different perspectives, and it you could see how the story, some people might color it differently, how the different portrayals of Naomi might be. Like for me, when I was growing up, when I heard this story, I think I just felt bad for Naomi, and I focused more on God's faithfulness of what happens with Ruth, But when I heard it this time, you kind of go a little bit deeper into the heart of Naomi, the struggle, the pain that she goes through, and so I think it's nice to kind of just see the different perspectives of how other people might view it, because that kind of helps you maybe understand and gain more from the story too, possibly.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Again, it was not right or wrong. It's just very interesting. You almost immediately went to here's my opposition, and here's what I'm going to be decrying. And someone who. And maybe I'm thinking about like the person who necessarily doesn't know the opposition and doesn't know like people are saying that. Then they'll go like, is there validity to that? That's where my brain goes. Yeah. And maybe that's just a thing that I should kind of revisit or whatever. But in any case,
I also, part of the reason I went that direction, just maybe this was inside, was I also want to preempt the fact that some people might come across that interpretation later on.
I see.
So in the sense, I've already helped them understand, hey, I know the objections to kind of this, and this is my counter argument to that. And and deep down inside, honestly, a lot of it was I felt pretty defensive for Naomi. You know what I mean? A lot of times some people in the Bible get caricaturized, and in my mind I'm like, these are real people. Let's really try to figure out, hey, what's really going on here? And for Naomi, I was like, man, I don't want her to go that way. And not that I'm the only one who sees this, but I'm like, if I'm one of the voices that can kind of portray what I think is really going on, I want to be able to put that out there so people see the three-dimensional Naomi, And so, all of that I think is,
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting thought. Like, you're right. And this just goes back to like, as a preacher, we're trying to do so many things at once. It's not just about biblical truth. And being like a local church pastor who gives the word, like there is the eloquence aspect. There is the teaching of the the scriptural truth that's right there, and you have to dig it out through exegesis. And then there is also a bit of shepherding. There's a bit of pastoring that you're doing, right? By telling your people, like, hey, you might come across this interpretation of who Naomi is, but from somebody else. What I'm saying is, from us, here's what I think is going on here, you know?
And for me, that's so important, especially nowadays, because of how much information is out there. And especially on the internet, you come across all these different interpretations. And I really, a part of the when I was going through it, people are like, man, he's going to detail making his case. You know, why is he doing that? And part of it was I want to increase biblical literacy in people's lives, but also as they engage these other opinions, I want them to engage it intelligently, you know, and be able to kind of navigate this stuff with a little bit more, I don't know, just less, a little bit more knowledge.
Sure.
You know, so just be able to handle it, because the internet is filled with stuff. I mean, there's stuff out there that people are like, oh my God, this is so scary. And then I look at them like, no, this is BS. There's no scholarship behind this whatsoever.
For sure.
You know, and slowly trying to give little pieces to people that can kind of add to their arsenal. So
yeah, you guys have it hard preaching, because I think you have to, I think there's a lot you want to bless the people, you want to speak from your heart what the Lord is telling you, and I think there's so many things that you could possibly cover, but you have to do it all in like a certain time frame, right? Time frame, right, Kiwan? And so even me, sometimes when I listen to sermons, or Kiwan's sermon, I'm like, oh, maybe you could have talked about that a little less, or maybe you shouldn't have said that way. So even me as his wife, there's like so many thoughts going through my head where I could pick at it, and imagine somebody else would be like, there's so many things that you guys have to kind of either defend or either try to encourage. So it's hard being a pastor.
And she loves you. Imagine someone who doesn't love you doing the same thing.
Always picking. Always telling me not to say stuff. No,
I think, well, again, leaning on Rala as a different perspective, like, does that, are you more appreciative of being equipped in that way? So, like, invariably, you might come across another message about Ruth and Naomi, right? Does it make you more appreciative of knowing that, like, Pastor Key took the time to say, other voices are saying this. Here's why I don't think that that's necessarily the case, right? Does it help you in your, reframing of those things later, or, like, how does that hit you?
I think it depends on if I've already heard that kind of perspective before. But if it's a new perspective that I didn't know before, then of course it's like, oh, it broadens my background of the story. It broadens my understanding of the story. So I think it really depends on just if I've heard it before, or if I feel like it's going on and on, or it's really depending on my own personal history with that particular story, or my personal experience with that story. So it depends, but it's I guess it always does help. So
that's the thing. Like,
I like how you said that begrudgingly, like that always helps.
The preempting of possible future encounters with material that might be in disagreement with what you say. No, that's always a possibility, but the actual material by itself should be able to stand on its own.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Sure. And so that's why I landed on that line, because it'll preempt certain things, but it's also interesting on its own. And I feel like I was like, okay, this seems like a safe place to kind of direct all this. So.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Coming back to the heart of the message then, and please correct me if I'm not exactly hitting the center of it, or if if there's another thing that you want to maybe emphasize more. But coming back to the heart of the message, to me, as I try to think about the message again, there's a lot of Ruth is Ruth in so many ways, especially through the story, because of what Naomi is able to do, who Naomi is supposed to be to Ruth. and also what Naomi does for Ruth. You know, I go back and listen to the message, and I go back and re-encounter the Ruth and Naomi story, and there is a the best way that I can describe it is like there is a biblical shrewdness that is almost necessary, you know, like in the life of the believer. You know, like if you read the Gospels, Jesus will talk about, like, you know, he'll give the parable of the shrewd manager and how there is a in English the word is shrewd, but for lack of a better one, there is a kind of shrewdness that you almost need to have in order to survive in this world.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
And Naomi exhibits that shrewdness. Like once she's able to sort of step away from her grief and her bitterness at God and how life has turned out for her, she is able to be the support for Ruth that she needs to be.
Yep.
And oftentimes that, especially in that story, that support looks like shrewdness.
Yeah.
Hence what you were alluding to. People call her opportunistic. They call her manipulative. They call her all these things. It's like, I don't, you know, this reminds me of kind of the line that we took last week when we had Pastor Christine on, right? And we were talking about how, like, in the story of the birth of Samuel, we said, like, taken wrongly, that story is about what Hannah needed to do to be pregnant.
Yeah.
When the reality is, like, no, that's not what that story is about at all. It's about Hannah's submission and her ultimate God, whatever you do, it's your will.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden she's pregnant, right? So if we use that lens to look at the Ruth and Naomi story, Naomi goes, I am so in despair because not only has my husband and my sons been taken away from me. So it's not only that, like, the people, the personal relationships are now no longer in my life, but sense of security, patriarchal societies, like that's how she would have secured kind of her financial, like, standing in the world, her social standing in the world. Like, she's absolutely at the end of herself. She has nothing.
Yeah.
And she's able to navigate all of that with a kind of shrewdness that's necessary to not only have her be able to stand tall afterwards, but all this is for Ruth.
Yeah.
You know? I'm curious as to the lessons that can be highlighted here from the preacher, the giver of the message, and maybe some lessons that are immediately apparent to the hearer of the message, right? And I want to cover all of those things, all of those perspectives, right? Okay. Pastor Keith, for you though, let me just start with you. The sort of immediate takeaways for you, like what are some of those bullet points that immediately jump out that if somebody who's listening to that message walks away, these are the first things that you'd wish that they would keep if they have to throw away everything else?
Yeah. From that section.
Yeah.
For me, it's really about why does she do what she does? You know what I mean? So instead of just looking at her actions on the surface, kind of what you were alluding to, why does she get to that place where she feels she needs to be this way? You know, and so for me, it really is about humanizing the being behind the actions. And the more I'm able to do that, the more I feel like the character becomes relatable. Rather than just kind of like, this is kind of a thing you need to do in a situation like this, I'd rather get them to identify with the plight of this person and then the reasoning why they arrived and did what they did. And it helps us to connect and understand, oh my goodness, if I was in a similar situation, I'd probably be the same, if not worse.
Sure.
You know, and how does faith look in the mess of all of that? And, you know, the net result is Ruth ends up getting married and having a kid, and that kid ends up being in the line of David, you know? And so there is this sense that God almost was smiling down on her, you know? And when I think about Naomi and just in that situation, she was using, with all of her energy, the small pieces that she had available to her as best as she could. And some people might say, is that human effort or is that faith? And I'm like, I don't think that dichotomy needs to exist in this situation. And she took what God gave to her. You know that story, like where somebody's stuck on a rock and it's all water around them because there's a huge flood, and then a boat comes by, and then, you know, the guy is praying for rescue and he sees a boat and he's like, oh, that's not God. So lets the boat go by a few times. And so maybe these are opportunities that God gave to her that she was like, you know what? This is what I have. I'm going to do the best of my ability, be a good steward of these things, and then let's see where it leads. Because there's no guarantee any of that would have worked out. Yeah. You know, so that's kind of where my mind goes.
Sure.
With stuff.
Rala, what about for you? Like, when you examine, you know, the relationship between Ruth and Naomi, or maybe just Naomi on her own, like, what are some things that immediately stand out to you, kind of, that hit you, like, deep in your heart?
So I think the reason why this past week, the sermon, I told you, like it really spoke to me. It moved me. And I think the reason why was because just looking into Naomi's story, the brokenness of losing her children and then, you know, losing her husband as well. I think when you suffer a deep loss or a deep grief, it really changes you as a person. And, you know, as Kiwan was saying, you know, maybe she took certain routes because she felt like she had no other choice. But at the same time, one of the things that Kiwan was saying during the sermon was sometimes when we are in a broken place, like Naomi, we feel like God has left us, or His grace is no longer over us, or we've lost His favor. But that's not true. You know, He's always there. He's always with us. And so for me, when I was listening to this sermon, there were times when I felt like that, where just because I felt in such a it was a difficult place for me. And so sometimes I would question, is God still with me? You know, is His grace still with me? Is His favor still over me? And then when I look in that moment, it may feel like He's not there. But, you know, when I go back and look at it, you know, His favor was still with me. He didn't leave me. And so I think just looking into Naomi's story and walking through her story and her journey like that, it just hit a soft spot for me. And it just reminded me of God's faithfulness in my life. So I didn't tell Kiwan this, but I actually was like kind of tearing up at the end of the sermon. And I had these tissues because it's allergy season as well. And I was just like, I was tearing, and I was sniffling too. And then my son Brandon was next to me, and he's like, are your allergies really bad right now? And then I just gave him this look, and then I just kept on wiping away the tears and blowing my nose. So it was just really funny. But yeah, that for me, that's what really spoke to my heart the most.
Yeah. It strikes me that, you know, you go back and read the story, and perhaps, you know, solely for the reason that, or like by virtue of the fact that it is in biblical canon, there is a huge thing of like, oh, look what like God is doing through this story, you know. But careful readers of that story will observe that at no point in that story does it say that God explicitly does anything. And yet we still hold up the Ruth and Naomi story as a wonderful kind of a celebration of what God can do through people. But again, careful readers need to examine the fact that if God is not the one specifically, like He does at other points throughout the Bible, where He might come down and send a pillar of cloud, or He might come down and strike every firstborn that doesn't have like lamb's blood over the doorpost. Like, if he doesn't come down in the form of Jesus, they're like, it's not God working. And there is a chasm that sort of needs to be jumped in our understanding of it's so easily forgotten. Like, how does God do these things in people's lives?
Yeah.
He does them through people. How is Naomi ever supposed to be confident enough, brave enough, shrewd enough, enough to be able to do all these things in order to be good counsel to Ruth, who secures a husband in Boaz? Like, how is she able to do that?
No.
How is she able to talk about the faithfulness of God in her life if God is not specifically at work?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just a story of what God can do through people.
Yeah, and I love that. I think that's exactly right. Actually, so I was choosing between two sermons to speak on this week. It was this one, and the other one was on the book of Esther, which is another book where God is not even mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yet all the commentators say God is very clearly being implicitly addressed as being active. Yeah. Actually, he is the subject and object of the entire story. Yes. And same thing is true for the book of Ruth. One thing I also like about the direction you're taking that is, how did Naomi get to a place where she even wanted to live anymore? You know what I mean? Where she felt motivated. Hey, you know what? I'm still going to have energy. I'm still going to work to make a better life for Ruth. Where did she get the energy from? I think that came from all the years of walking faithfully with God. It was still enough of a foundation to tell her, my life isn't over.
Yeah.
And then I think from there, man, that's another. I should have included that. But that's what these podcasts are for, right?
Yeah, that's what these podcasts are for. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
No, I think you bring a really good point, Josh, about it kind of reminds me of that song. What was it? The lyrics are, even though I don't see it, you're working, right? Like,
Waymaker.
Yeah. So, and it's true. You don't really see in the story of Naomi and Ruth, you don't say, and the Lord said, and he did, you know? That's not there. And I like the point that you brought that out, that because there's been times in my life where I feel like I don't specifically hear exactly what the Lord wants me to do, or I feel like I don't know what direction I'm supposed to take. And it almost seems like God is silent at that time, but I know he's still doing something. It's just, I just don't know what it is. But just because I don't know what it is, it doesn't mean he's being lazy, or, his, or that he's not moving around me. So I think that's a good point that you brought up. Yeah. And to what Kyuan said about, how did she even get to a place where she felt like, she wants to live, anymore? Because, I've known people who've lost their children and they say, I don't want to live anymore either, So, but yeah, so good points.
Yeah. And in none of this do we ever minimize kind of like the grief, the loss, the despair that we might go through, or just like looking back at the Bible, like it's really quick. Like if you just read the story and if you time yourself, you might spend about 1 minute in Naomi's despair. Yeah. But imagine how deep that despair was. Imagine how crazy painful that despair was. I mean, she says it herself, and this is a point that you made, Pastor Key. Like, I was full, but the Lord made me empty. That is, I don't know. It's a quick when you just read over it, but you have to remember, like, that probably wasn't lived out in 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's right.
That wasn't 45 seconds or a minute of being lived out. That is something that she stayed in, and eventually, at some point, she just made that turn. And hopefully that is some bit of encouragement for us to like, for me, and this is my maybe impatient thing, is every so often I just want to shake somebody, be like, just wake up, right? Just like wake up out of your thing, right? And that's, at no point is Naomi ever shaken. right? Like there isn't an external voice that shakes Naomi. There's something inside of her, some magical formula of how she knows God or how she sees the circumstances of her life. Like though she is in despair now, she suddenly sees that there's opportunity or whatever it is. Eventually, we just need to work that out.
Yeah.
In our lives and kind of find God's will.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Rich, complex.
Yeah.
Real.
Yeah. To that end, then, there is a huge part of the story about the connection between Ruth and Naomi. Naomi has more than one daughters-in-law, but it is specifically the connection between Ruth and Naomi that's highlighted in this story. Pastor Key, your eventual end goal was something to the effect of find your Naomis, like find the people that do it for you, and you also go be a Naomi to somebody else's life. Like we got to search for him. Hence, I think some people going up to other people and be like, I'm going to be your Naomi, right? I'm curious as to like what is the Bible trying to do with the connection between Ruth and Naomi, and how then can that be lived out in our lives? So like maybe to take another tack at it, it's like, what does being a Naomi to somebody else, right? Like what does that look like today? How does that manifest itself, especially in possibly the most isolated culture in human history?
Yeah.
Like possibly in such a culture in which it's not only part of the ether, but it is almost expected of us that we would isolate, and things like extended community just don't exist anymore, right? How does that get lived out in our everyday life?
Part of the reason I think we isolate so much is because relationships are burdensome. They're complex, they're weighty, they don't turn out always. Most of the time, there's always something that happens,
sure,
right? And the other sermon, actually, I was going to talk about this. So in the Bible, Paul says, carry each other's burdens, right? That requires relationship in order to carry somebody's burdens. And I think the first place my mind goes to when I think about Naomi, in her grief, fighting for, taking on Ruth as a burden to kind of help her. And then also Ruth carrying Naomi as a burden, kind of this mutual thing, is that carrying each other's burdens is hard. You know what I mean? So a lot of people, they're like, I'll be there for you. I'll be the Ruth. And like, you realize how hard it is?
Yeah.
When you carry somebody's burden, if it doesn't feel like a burden, if it's not weighing on your shoulders, if it doesn't take up mental space, cause you anxiety, cause you stress, then you're not really carrying anybody's burden. And so I want to almost unromanticize the story a little bit and say, look, if you're really going to be Ruth, if you're really going to be Naomi for somebody else, recognize that it's going to be hard as nails. It's not going to feel very inspiring. Nobody is going to be walking around you with a camera doing a documentary of how sacrificial you are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
None of that's going to be there.
Yeah.
And that's what we're called to. That's what makes what Naomi did and what Ruth did so amazing, that nobody was watching, besides God, of course. Sure. And they still stayed faithful. And so the encouragement and the challenge and almost the rebuke, I would say, for the modern mind is, or the modern Christian churchgoers is, man, are you really carrying the burden of anybody in your church community? And this, this speaks to why you see 10% of the people in the church doing all the work, 90% of the people, and this is not not here to throw stones at anybody or anything like that, but it's just a reality. Imagine a community where everybody was carrying the burden together, and they realized, hey, we all got to carry it together. It's heavy. It's heavy for everybody, but if we all do it together, it's not as heavy.
Sure.
So that's kind of where my mind goes.
Yeah. Rala, I'd love to get your take on this as well. Like, how for you, how do you even process what it means to be Naomi in somebody else's life?
Yeah, I think Kiwon took a good, or he explained it well, because like he said, carrying somebody's burden. I think we sometimes when we get encouraged to actually want to be a help in someone's life, we think it might be easy, or it seems like exciting, and we're encouraged to do it. But then when we actually are doing it, it takes away from our time. It takes away from the things that we want to do. Mm-hmm. And it might be easy to, do it once or twice, but if you're going to continue to be that Naomi, it's gonna be hard. And I'm just thinking maybe, Naomi, just with all the things that she's been through and her life story, maybe she understood something. Maybe she got understood what it was to be a burden, and so she kind of understood what it takes to actually carry, a burden. And then I'm sure when all that tragedy happened to her, she probably understood it even more. What that kind of burden feels like. And so I think that's one thing where you go through things and sometimes you don't quite understand the heart of something until you actually experience it. And so that kind of opened your eyes up more to, like maybe that will open up your heart more to be able to want to do those things, even though it's harder. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think a lot of modern Christianity is we make everything feel so romantic. But I feel like real Christianity, I would say most of the time doesn't feel very romantic. It feels very mundane. But that's where the rubber meets the road, I feel like, in terms of our faith. Now, Jonathan Edwards talks about if we really want to, live that life, the burdensome life, we need to be inspired by our love for God. That's all true, but at the end of the day, when you're putting one foot in front of the other and trying to carry somebody's burden, it's probably not going to feel that great. It's going to be thankless. But still, I almost want to normalize that experience for people. Hey, this is normal. Don't think this is abnormal. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm carrying somebody's burden. It sucks. I'm really unhappy. And I want to tell them, like, that's what it's supposed to feel like.
Yeah.
So.
It's almost like, how do you know that it's working? It's because it sucks.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a theme that comes up in the Bible all the time. I think what also I'd rather us make sure to mention also is that there is a kind of evangelistic aspect to it. Like, for all the props and all the great things that we're trying to say about Naomi right now, there is a part of, I am reminded of Ruth, who possibly like the turning point in Naomi's life, maybe, just maybe, if I may take a stab at it, is, we asked the question before, is how is Naomi able to get up out of her doldrums and kind of stand on her own 2 feet and be the person that we celebrate her to be. I think in some ways she is able to do it because of the belief or the support or whatever might have come from Ruth herself. Yeah. It's another thing that you highlighted, Pastor Key, in your message, in which Ruth would say this incredible thing of stop trying to, like Naomi was trying to send her away. Ruth's saying, stop trying to send me away, because if I haven't said it already, and I'm using a little bit of my sanctified imagination right now, but if I haven't said it already, I am going to be with you to the very end. She says, your people will be my people.
Oh man, so beautiful.
Your land will be my land, your God, my God. Where you die, so I will die. in the same place. She's ultimately like tethering herself to Naomi. I wonder if that's one of the things that kind of wakes Naomi up to be like,
Yeah, that's right.
oh shoot,
Yeah.
I have this other person that is counting on me,
Yeah.
like waiting for me, like literally going to die with me. So I don't get to do the thing that I want to do right now, which is isolate myself, be alone, kind of.
Just wither away and die.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like how, of course it would be tragic and of course it would be sad, but I wonder how many of us, we can at least conceptually go where Naomi was in the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
It is it's easier if you go away. Let me be this person. And then she's waking up out of that, because Ruth would say this incredible thing to her and say, your God is my God, right? So, and the idea there for me is that there is an evangelistic aspect to it, not only of the gospel, right? Although that is a huge aspect to it, but we are sort of evangelizing the concept of community, the concept of dying to yourself, of living for somebody else. The Galatians 6, what you're talking about, bear one another's burdens, for each has its own to bear. Like there is an evangelistic aspect to it, right? So when we decry the fact that we live in such an isolated society as I did before, maybe just maybe one of the cures for that isolation that we find in our society is I dare you to be Ruth or Naomi, any version. Like I dare you to be it, and to wake somebody up out of their thing so that they can be that to you.
Yeah, Ruth was transformative.
Yeah.
You're right. I think Ruth, what she said there was transformative to Naomi, not only because she said it, but because she followed through with what she said.
That's right.
So many people can say those words,
That's right.
but she still went.
Yeah.
She wasn't like, I take it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
When it's hard.
Yeah, never mind. Yeah, but what's interesting is that maybe the Bible doesn't disclose all the conversations that Naomi and Ruth had.
Sure.
So maybe Ruth, throughout all the time, she might have been constantly trying to speak truth to Naomi.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and I just realized that because we don't hear all that conversation or know all that dialogue, and so and because there's definitely been times in my life where people have spoken truth to me and I really needed to hear it. And so and just like it might have taken some time, but other times just like that, the next day I felt so much better about the perspective on something. So definitely what you said about just discipleship, about how we need to speak into each other's life, there is that evangelistic aspect of it too.
Man, all these other sermons are coming up.
Yeah.
Can I share one thought I had? That was great. Thanks, honey.
You're welcome.
This might be my second favorite episode of the podcast ever.
So let's think about this, right? Naomi, she had to overcome a good amount of prejudice, actually, to probably accept Ruth and Orpah into her family, right? And she does it, in a way where she's so loving that Ruth and Orpah become believers, right? Or at least we know Ruth definitely became a believer, right? This investment, this show of grace toward Ruth became something that helped her later on, came back to her, where Ruth, because of Naomi's initial investment, became a believer, and because Ruth was a believer and had been transformed by what Naomi had done, Ruth now was being a support for Naomi. And then Naomi later on in this story becomes a support for Ruth. And so there's this back and forth mutuality. And I think for me, what I see there is, it doesn't always happen this way, but to remember you're sowing into someone's life is not in vain. And it may very well come back and be the thing that saves you later on when you're down.
Yeah.
So I just saw that. I'm like, oh my God, that's really so encouraging to me, in terms of, because there's many times I'll invest. I'm like, well, that went nowhere.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. No, absolutely. I love kind of where we are in that and we even touched a kind of like a shade of this before about like the tendency is to want to make one person the hero over the other.
Yeah.
Ruth and Naomi, right? And while you did absolutely take your time and you intentionally, Pastor Key, you intentionally made sure that we knew that Naomi is nobody to kind of look down your nose at here in this story, but to also remember that Ruth wasn't just only the beneficiary of Naomi's good graces. I think you might have been onto something with your title, A Mutual Faith. You might have been onto something there about how it took the pair of them together to overcome Naomi isn't the only person that lost a husband and sons.
No.
Like, Naomi also lost her husband. I mean, I'm sorry. Ruth also lost her husband there.
Legit.
You're like, so these are two women in despair. These are two people in despair.
That's right.
And it's not that one person overcame it for the sake of both. It is they both decided we are going to, number one, trust in the Lord. But number two, we are going to be the support for each other so that God's will gets worked out in our lives.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? God is not explicitly mentioned to have done anything other than just be there, right? And somehow, some type of a way, a mutual faith. I'm reminded of the Gospels in which Jesus is preaching. There is a man on a mat, and he has his friends lower him through the roof of the house.
That's right.
So that he could just be in front of Jesus, and Jesus looks at the man, looks at his friends, and he says, "It's very curious faith, like your faith has healed you, their faith has healed you." Right? It's the idea that it wasn't just the faith of the man who was on the mat, but it was the faith of the people that brought the man to Jesus. It was one of the few times that you hear about this collective faith at work in somebody's life. But hundreds of years before that, generations and generations before that, you see Ruth and Naomi, and how the genesis of so much of what happens in the Gospels might also be found in Ruth and Naomi's story. Like, it's not one person over the other. So I just think there's like I'm getting like new life from the message. and from Ruth and
there's a lot of different things here.
No, absolutely. I think one final thought that I had is this. I think sometimes, Rala, I love what you said about the idea of like, surely those aren't the only times that Ruth and Naomi had conversations with each other. And Naomi was probably, to your point, and I think this is right, like Naomi was probably multiple times shooing away Ruth and Orpah so that she could, I don't know, whatever, and she probably in her own mind thought that was her way of like looking out for Ruth and Orpah, so that, like, go find, like, you have no business with me anymore, go, like, just try to find your life again, like, I'll go off and die alone, right? She probably thought that was her way of helping them out. I love what you said about, like, it took a while, probably. It took multiple conversations. It probably wasn't done all in one go. And so that tension, though, between where Ruth and Naomi are when Ruth finally says, like, don't tell me to go away because, like, your people will be my people, your God, my God, where you die, I will die. Like, that, we can kind of hold that up as, like, the ideal, right? And then we have, the place where Naomi was, in which she's so in despair. She says, I was full, but the Lord has made me empty. Like, we kind of have these two places, and there is a tension between these two realities, right? There is what has happened and what needs to happen, or whatever. For me, I often refer to that as kind of like the operational, like, there is the ideal of our faith, and then there is kind of like an operational faith. So take something like forgiveness. And ideally, we forgive our enemies.
Yeah, you forgive and forget.
Yeah.
And then that's it, right?
Yeah.
But really,
it never happens that way, does it?
No.
It never, it's not that people have not forgiven other people, but sometimes it just takes a while, right?
Yeah. And you have to re-forgive them.
Yes.
Oh boy.
Yes. Not only that, but on the way to forgiveness, you still have to live your life calling yourself a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And there are those people that might go so far as to say you're living in sin if you don't forgive. It's who among us has forgiven so completely, so immediately besides Christ?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So taking that idea of I just call that operational level Christianity, in which you're just doing what you can to get by until that thing hits you where you're finally able to be Christ in that moment, right? My question to you is, when you look at Ruth and Naomi, and they had Naomi and Ruth are in the place of tension. They haven't gotten to the place of the ideal where they're mutually giving their faith to each other and rising up out of this situation. Okay, my question is how do we endure those times of tension, or what I referred to before as the operational level, right? Because Rala, for you, I'm sure, as you said, somebody spoke into your life very deeply at a very important time in your life, right? But if it took a while, how did you endure those moments of tension? How did you endure all of those moments in which they said it to you, but it didn't really land, right? Pastor Key, I'm also throwing this to you too. To the person that wants to be a Ruth or Naomi to somebody else, but their counterpart is not receiving it as such, how do they endure?
I think one thing that's important to realize and to understand is that, we speak of this ideal where we want to be.
Sure.
And I think we get encouraged because, I want to be like that. I want to be like Ruth to Naomi, and those are all the good times, right? But life is not like that. I guess that's why it's an ideal, Life is hard. And I think one of the things that, as I go through my own life and face different things, sometimes you just have to go through it, and you don't realize until after you go through it. You really learn different things through that struggle that you wouldn't have understood if you didn't go through. Not saying that we need to go through so many struggles in life, but sometimes you just go through hardships, and there's things that you can glean from it, and taking the whole Naomi and Ruth story, what you said before, how I was saying, we don't see all the conversations, and then for Naomi herself, we only see, in the Bible it says, her husband died, her kids died, and we don't see all the background of what she had to go through, how every day she woke up and she probably didn't want to live. Every day she had to, struggle to live. We don't see all of those things, and so the reality is it is going to be hard, and it's never going to be perfect until that last day, and so I don't know, for me, when I go through those times, sometimes it's just hard, and you really have to sometimes I just don't want to do anything, so I don't do anything. I'm just mad, I'm bitter, right? And that might last for a while, but after a while, it's I need to be on my knees and pray because there's nothing else I can do, right? Or it's just that through time, you come into a better place. I don't know. And sometimes I just ask for peace for myself. I know this world is going to throw different things at me. And if I'm going to be anxious and fearful all the time about those things, then it's not a good life that I'm going to have. So one of the things I'll ask for as I pray, say, Lord, I just want some peace. I want to go with a heart of peace into whatever I'm going to have to encounter in this life, because it's not going to be an easy life. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think I just went on this huge tangent.
No, not at all. But that's absolutely, absolutely. But so in that place then, right? Because you're right at the beginning of where I want to be, right? But but guiding it just for a moment. Then okay. You just have to go through it. There's a lot of that I agree with. You know, like there is something in the lived experience of the Christian faith that will never come across unless you go through yourself, right? Like 100%. So let me ask it this way, Rala, for you, let's say like in your journey, you want to be a Ruth or Naomi to somebody else. But that person is not receiving it. That person is absolutely not receiving your help, your encouragement, your words. They are not even in the place to hear you, but your heart goes out to them and you try and you try and you try. And that's what I'm talking about when it comes to the operational level of, so like this message particular, we're just trying to live it out and it's operational, right? What's your advice? How do you process it? How do you get through that season in which you're trying to be a great support to somebody, but they're not in the place to receive it?
Okay. I think you just continue to do what you're doing and don't stop. For instance, you know, sometimes there's a point in my life where some people would reach out to me and it's like, I'm not ready to, you know, talk or reach out to anybody right now. But they would always tell me, okay, well, if you ever want to talk, I'm here, you know? So I think you could still be present and let them know that you're still there, that you're still walking with them, that you'll still pray for them. Even if they're not ready to receive whatever you want to say or whatever truth that you want to speak into their life, you could still be a present friend. You could still, you know, check in on them and definitely pray for them. So even if they're not receiving it, just like what Ruth did for Naomi, she just stood by her. She's still with her. So I think that what we talked about in the beginning, presence, like really being present in someone's life is not just being present for them in the good times, but being present for them regardless of whatever they're going through. So,
I mean,
what do you think?
No, if they're not going to receive it, I will try to be a presence that is with intolerance for them, meaning like something that is palatable for them until I feel like maybe God is calling me to push. Because, you know, when Naomi tells Ruth to go away, right, in the beginning, you know, Ruth had to make a decision. Am I going to just kind of go with that, or am I going to push in this moment? You know, and sometimes I think somebody might be pushing you away and you need to push back. But then there's other moments where they're pushing away, you realize this is not the time.
Sure. That's
where wisdom, I think, kind of comes into play. So that's generally what I would say. You know, actually, this reminds me of a story of a professor of mine when I was back in seminary. His daughter tragically died. She was in elementary school. And people said really stupid things to him. One person said at the funeral, oh, now you have a sermon illustration for the future.
Wow.
It's freaking crazy, right? But he said probably the best thing somebody did for him was his friend came to his house and said, hey, you know what? I'm not going to say anything to you, you know, whatever. I'm just going to be here. I'm just going to sit in your living room, just go about my day. But if you need me, I'm here. And the professor said, it was kind of awkward because he was in my living room for like a few days. But he gave me the space I needed, but at the same time was a presence that I needed. And through his own wisdom, because it probably took a little bit of guts to be like, I'm going to sit in your living room for the next few days, you know what I mean, to impose on like that. But yeah, you just got to, with as much wisdom as you can and knowing the person, knowing the situation, just ride that line, you know. And but if you feel like you don't want to push, still be as present as you can. And that's really as much as you can do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really know what else.
Yeah. You know, somehow or another, Ruth and Naomi got through it, and that is a great encouragement. I think it should be at least a great encouragement to us to know that if they got through it, then we can get through it. And so, yeah, it's probably just a good place to leave it. My heart goes out to everyone that is listening and might be going through some version, some kind of a shade or an echo of what we read with Ruth and Naomi, the kind of despair that you might be in, the kind of darkness that you are in right now, my heart goes out to you. And, my very deep hope and prayer, encouragement, if you're going through that, is that you, at the very least, you have a Ruth or you have a Naomi in your life. People that are able to be a support to you, people that are able to receive you in the place that you're in, but also when the timing is right and when you're able to hear it, that they push you so much so that, dare I say, my God will be your God, right? Like, my land, your land, my people, your people. There are, there's the Ruth that we see at the beginning, as you said, Pastor Keith, and there's a Naomi that we see at the beginning, and there's a Naomi that we see at the end, and they're two very different people. There is also a Ruth that we see at the beginning, and there is a Ruth that we see at the end, and some version of that is accessible to every believer, I believe. So with that, we hope that you're able to kind of get that. Rala, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
it was nice to be here. I told Kiwon when you guys first started this that one day I wanted to be on this show, if that you can call it that. Yeah. But then when he asked me yesterday, I was like, no, I can't do it. It's a little bit more stressful than I thought it was, because it's like, even though no one's really watching us, I feel like somebody's watching me.
Sure.
So,
hey, but you're natural.
It was fun. I don't know, but it was nice to be here. Yeah. Hopefully, maybe Don and I can take over this show one day. Don
would love that.
Josh's wife. Hey, Don, if you're listening.
Yeah. I'm thankful that you're here, but technically Dawn was here on this podcast for like 4 minutes before you were.
I remember. Yeah, it was very quick.
She snuck in when she wasn't supposed to. Dawn! In either case, we're so thankful. I'm thankful that you were able to be here. Hopefully this was as much of a blessing to you as it was to us. And I'm sure also to the person listening or to the person watching to be like, oh, that's really cool. We were able to sub out Pastor Bobe, and we were able to get Rala, and it was still an amazing conversation.
Thanks.
Podcast. So.
Bobe, come back, so I don't have to do this again.
Yes, but also have fun at your conference. That'll do it for us. Thank you, Rala, again. Thank you, Pastor Key. Thank you
Josh.
for... Oh, wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you thanking me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with another new episode of NMPC Plus. Until then, we pray that you are blessed. And this is NMPC Plus signing off for now.